thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. It's great to have you all here. So today is all about sending smarter communications and delving into the wild and wonderful world of social media a little bit, dipping our toe in, understanding where we are and maybe how we can progress through it all. So today we'll be covering some statistics. We've got Stu Williams from Shunt Media here, and we'll be delving into the reality of what we're all working with and where people's eyeballs are and attention is and those sorts of things. We'll be touching on signal versus noise, some definitions, social media policies and things like that, how to create your goals around that, and then obviously how to schedule your calendars around posting bits and pieces. So getting into it, we'll have a look at statistics. So a lot of it, obviously, you guys can probably guess, but in Australia in December, the daily average time on site for the top 6 social media networks, which might be surprising to some, maybe not to others, but YouTube, people on average, the average Australian is spending 20 minutes a day looking at YouTube. So when you look at traditional media and those sorts of things and why they're worried, it's because everyone's looking at these different channels instead, perhaps. Facebook with 18 minutes, Reddit, Instagram, Pinterest, and LinkedIn as well. The other one not being mentioned there is TikTok, and obviously it's not looking at other things which are pseudo social networks like WhatsApp and Telegram and things like that as well. But it's a good conversation starter as to these names and where people are spending their time and all those sorts of things. It's a nice reminder as well that people are spending their time looking at other things. This is the average Australian. Obviously, there's a bunch of people spending less than this, and there's a bunch of people spending more. So the world's most used social platforms globally are Facebook, then YouTube, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, and then the list starts to drop down into a bunch of different things that you may or may not have heard, with Twitter and bits and pieces like that as well. So some interesting stats in Australia. 6 in 10 working age internet users, roughly 60%, now buy something online every single week. So online purchases are most definitely and COVID, I presume, has only helped that with people, or in some states in Australia, with not being able to get to the shops as we used to. And baby boomers, really interesting, are the fastest growing audience segments on Facebook and Instagram. So over the last 2 years, the fastest growing audience segments are not the young'uns, they're the baby boomers. Really, really interesting statistics that I thought I should share, because whenever we talk about social media, everyone thinks it's young people and young people doing bits and pieces, whereas it's the young at hearts, the baby boomers, who are the fastest growing folks up there. So I'd like to bring in Stu Williams, if I can. Stuart's from Shunt Media. Shunt predominantly works with sports organisations, but in our experience, what we see in the sports organisations, sporting clubs, is very much reflected in the non-sports organisations as well. So I think it's very apt to go through some of the statistics that he has. Stu, are you there?
Yes, I am. Isaac, can you hear me?
We can indeed.
Okay.
It would be wonderful if you could take us through some of these statistics that you have here.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As Isaac said, we predominantly work in the sports space as far as social media data is concerned. We're also having a look at local government and also, interestingly enough, real estate. So there's 3 sectors that we're involved in. Sports are what we've always done, where our background is, and what we've always been done the most work on. So look, in a nutshell, what we do is we use the publicly available APIs provided by the social media channels to get some basic data from accounts. And we're currently looking at about 20,000 plus accounts from 100 odd sports in the sports space, specifically as it relates to Australia. And Isaac's just taken some research we've done and just pulled this page together to give you an idea as to what is going on. So as of the end of 31st December last year, the big numbers at the top is what the sector looked like, and we've included those to give a bit of perspective and context in terms of what's actually going on. The sports sector across the whole space, including national, international teams, all the way down through to grassroots clubs from multiple sports, now have a combined audience of 133 million. So we're reasonably comfortable to say that probably at least every man, woman and child in this country has at least one or two sports accounts they follow, depending on how old they are, of course, via the social media. In terms of, so that's the eyeballs, in terms of how many people are actively looking at sports social media content. In terms of the what we call the outputs, or the posts published by the sector, last year alone, you can see the number there, 3.2 million posts were published across social media channels by the sector in its entirety. So it's a pretty chunky amount of content that's being generated each year by sport, even through COVID and all the challenges that's presented. And last but not least, the big number there, the engagement number. So that's what the audiences are how the audiences are effectively engaging with the content. So that includes reactions, comments, and shares across the various channels. Last year alone, that stood at 906 million. Now, there's still a few holes that we've got in our data, and we're reasonably comfortable and confident to say that that figure is probably close to a billion engagements per annum. So it's a big space. That's just Australia. Yeah, that's right. So that's just Australia. Of course, we're biased because we work in the sports space, but we don't think there's too many sectors that can compete or on a similar scale to sport. And what we talk a lot about is this idea that one of sports' unique advantages is this idea that by default it has a highly engaged, emotionally connected audience, and that's what increasingly sponsors and corporate partners are looking for. And we're encouraging in our work with Clubland in particular, as far as sports are concerned, to consider other alternative revenue streams when it comes to sponsorship other than signage around a footy ground, for example, and to think about those audiences that you've generated over how long it might be as an asset in their own right. So that's that. That's the big picture. There's a couple other graphs here just showing the engagement numbers by platform. It's interesting just looking at the engagement numbers that Instagram already is twice the size of Facebook in terms of total engagements, and Twitter is becoming more and more niche. And the big mover that we're seeing in a sports context, at least anyway, is TikTok. What we're supporting the sports increasingly now about is making their sport TikTokable, and we think that if that can be achieved, you can potentially introduce sport to a whole new audience, particularly the younger generations. Obviously, Isaac's mentioned the older one, but we see TikTok as being where the next generation of participants are going to come from a sports context, and still in those audiences. In terms of the platforms, as you can see there, it's the other way around, in so much as the majority of the audience, at least still for the time being anyway, is with Facebook. What we're seeing in a club setting with grassroots clubland setting with Facebook is that it's almost becoming what we refer to as utility, in that it's becoming like the default or the platform that sports clubs are increasingly using as in a lot of cases, their only communication platform. Despite all the challenges around Facebook and the negative publicity and the press they've had, etc., it still is quite a very useful platform for sports and for clubs to use, in so much as it's free, everyone knows how to use it, it's where the audiences are, there's no maintenance costs or maintenance involved in keeping the thing running, unlike websites. And increasingly we're seeing that clubs are doing away or mothballing their websites and are kind of coming to Facebook as the default. And just on that, we talk a lot about different platforms being used for different purposes. And Facebook really is becoming the platform that is sort of ubiquitous, or a utility, in so much as the delivery of the sport. So all the functional aspects of delivering sport in terms of letting people know about events and calendars and programs and all those sorts of things. That's where Facebook has a real strength, and that's where we're seeing it being used now as this default platform in terms of where that's at. Just one other quick point. I don't want to bang on too much about it. I could talk about this all day, but just one other point in terms of what we've seen over the last 2 years as it relates to the impact of COVID in particular, and these two graphs on the right-hand side here. So as I say, we're tracking about 99,000 clubs across 70 sports. What we've seen over the last 2 years in the green graph at the top is that the number of posts published took a bit of a hit in 2020, down by about 500,000 across the sector. It has recovered in 21, it's back to 18 levels. We're of a view that probably by the end of this year, we'll be back to pre-COVID levels, where we were at in 19. The bigger concern for us definitely is on the engagement side of the equation. And certainly there's some separate research from Australian Sports Foundation and Sport Australia around this, in that what they're suggesting is that because of COVID, there's been a disconnect in a sports context in particular, in so much as everyone's had been stuck at home, had other things to do, found other interests because they can't play sport or whatever. And because of that, they've drifted away from that participation and membership side of things as far as grassroots club sport is concerned. And we can see that in the data as far as social media is concerned. And we look at that as a bit of a canary in the coal mine. As you can see in 2020, the total engagement is down about 15 million on 2019. And even last year, it's still below levels, 2018 levels. And this is an area that we're really quite concerned about and watching quite closely over the course of this year, is that based on our mass, we think it's going to be another 2 years before grassroots clubs are back to where they were pre-COVID. And as tough as the last 2 years have been from a disruption point of view, as far as COVID is concerned, depending on where you are, we're encouraging sports at all levels that they probably need to double down on this space and work even harder to reconnect with those audiences through this year to get this back on track. This is probably, out of all of this and all the things we're looking at, this is probably our greatest concern, is what we're seeing as far as the social data is concerned anyway, as far as this disconnect because of COVID-related disruptions. Look, as I say, there's a bunch of other things I could bang on about, but I'm sure there's plenty of other things Isaac wants to talk about, so I'll leave it at that. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea in terms of the big picture stuff, in terms of what we're seeing across the sector, and also at a more, grassroots club level as well, what the data is telling us and some of the things that we're thinking about off the back of that. So I'll hand it back to Isaac.
That's great, Stu. Thank you very much. Like we said, it is talking to sport, but we see it's same really, with member-driven organisations all having a similar sort of impact out the back of COVID, with fragmentation of their memberships, which we spoke about in a previous webinar. So it's really quite interesting as to where people are and what they're doing, which we'll get into in a little bit more. Stu from Shunt Media, thank you. Now, the other question mark that we always forget is email. Well, where's email on all this? Well, email is not forgotten. The big advantage of email is that everyone uses email. 92% of adults in Australia have an email address. 61% roughly access it every single day. So email shouldn't be the forgotten one. It's just you need to work out how that fits into your mix. You've only got so many hands, or your volunteers only have so many hands. So how it plugs into your communication mix needs to be considered, but it's most definitely still something that should be on your agenda. Newsletters is the obvious one for that communication channel. They should be frequent. Pick a cadence that is not only suitable but sustainable for your organization. I'm most definitely guilty of saying we're going to send one every single month and then end up sending it every other month or something along those lines. So make sure that you've got something sustainable. And we'll get into signal versus noise more in a moment, but knowing why we're sending this email, knowing who the readers are through using personas, which we'll touch on in a moment, and keeping it really short and focused is really, really important when drafting your emails. So we'll get on to signal versus noise, which is something that we're really, really passionate about with Tidy. We talk a lot about signal to noise ratio for volunteers because volunteers are typically very busy people. There's a more than 50% chance that because you're watching this, because you're a volunteer on a committee, you're on another committee. There's a more than 50% chance that people on committees are on other committees. I know I'm that person because either we're suckers or we're just really good people that like to put our hands up and help out. But as a result, we're also busy in our day-to-day lives as well. So most people on committees are also managers or business owners or leaders in their community in their own right. And it means that they're busy people and they usually have a lot of inflowing information. So emails and all sorts of other things that they've got going on in their lives. So we talk a lot about signal to noise. So it's a very noisy environment that we're operating in now, and making sure that we have the right signal to dissect through that noise and reach the right person at the right time and the right place is really, really important for us as a platform with Tidy, but also with your members and other stakeholders. So really it's the measurement of the relationship between the stuff you want to hear and the stuff that you don't want to hear. Is the world too noisy or is our signal too weak? As Stu's just illustrated quite nicely, there's a huge amount of posts out there, nearly 1 billion posts being liked and what have you. That's a huge amount of noise. Whenever you open up Instagram or Facebook or what have you, the whole goal of their platform is for you to scroll through as much stuff as they can get you through. So if you're on the other side of that and trying to post something that will make someone stop scrolling and listen to your message, we've got to be really clear about what we're doing and how we're doing that. And in other words, and I'll get off this rant in a moment, but we're finding that we're giving everyone a microphone and everyone seemingly is using it as well, even if they don't necessarily have a huge amount to add, perhaps. Politicians is a great example, and I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure we've all got someone in mind where it's exhausting to listen to politicians speak sometimes because they're not really saying anything. There's not enough signal. There's a lot of fluff happening, and we obviously spoke about fluff in the last webinar around strategy, but it goes to that point as well. So click-through rates on most social media, Stu didn't talk about this, but effectively the click-through rate is when you post something and there's a link out to an event or a bigger article or what have you, is getting closer and closer to zero. It's not because the content isn't worth clicking on, but it's because there's so much other noise or junk out there in your feeds that you just don't have time or you want to keep on scrolling because the algorithms have really done a cracking job at it. So as an individual, we're constantly trying to cut down our noise, I hope, and improve the signal that we're getting. And as an organization sending out more noise, we need to be really careful that we're not sending out just noise and we're trying to improve the signal that we're sending out. So before we move on, we'll just define some things around the terminology that we use with social media. So a target audience is who we want to reach. It's not just members, but it's also potential members, past members, volunteers, sponsors, partners, local government, politicians even. They can all be part of the target audience that we want to be in touch with. A persona, which we'll dig into in a moment, is the single fictitious person that encompasses the key characteristics of that target audience. So you break the target audience into different segments and who is the John Doe or Joe Doe that best encapsulates that particular person. And a user is a person who's interacting with that marketing material. You can call them customers or consumers or members even. So digging into personas I'm going to stress a little bit on, but they're actually really worthwhile sitting down as an organization and writing down who are our personas involved with the club. I've seen professional sports organizations and professional associations do this really, really well, and it adjusts the way that communication and language is being used, knowing that you've got a range of people engaging in your content, from baby boomers to people coming out of high school, from people that are highly engaged to people that are loosely engaged. So you need to understand how to write to each of those and knowing where to reach them. It's no point trying to reach out to folks on TikTok if they've never even heard of what a TikTok is. Similarly, LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, all of those channels are very different, and understanding who's on which platform is important. It's also really important from how many hands a volunteer organization has, because you can spread yourself too thin and you end up, again, just creating noise everywhere, which isn't that much more helpful. Personas also help us with knowing what to write about and what content to craft, and understanding how to talk to the audience. What language are we going to use? Creating stories or videos for 16-year-old boys that play footy is very, very different to people that want to talk about United Nations policy around something, the Ukraine, for example. Very different channels, very different language to be used. Everyone in the organization, everyone in the committee should know who the personas are. If you're part of the 666 session last week, you would have seen sitting down and doing the big review, having the personas that are there helps with understanding what your strategy is and what it shouldn't be. So culling out those things that we don't care about. So you could have personas for your local politicians, but is that someone that we really care about attracting? Probably not. So it's really, really important to understand and help us focus as an organization, because usually we have very finite resources, so we know where to push. Typically your events manager, social media liaison people, whatever the roles are that you call them in your organization, hopefully you have people fitting these roles. Memberships manager, marketing or newsletter manager, they should all understand very clearly who the personas are, so who we're writing for, and again, what social media channels we're using for what thing. So, and this is a bit of a workshop tool as well. So sit down and sit down with the organization to determine who the personas are. Once you start digging in, it's actually a little bit more difficult than what it sounds. Make up a name. I am John Doe. I do X, Y, and Z. My goals are I want to better engage with the community. I want to just go down and have a beer and talk to somebody. I want to grow carrots and feed myself with the community garden, whatever it is. Write them down. The needs, I need to feel this out of my interaction with the organization. I need to feel like I can connect with people and talk about policies. I need to feel like I'm growing something with the community garden. I need to feel like I'm participating in sport or whatever the case might be, and attitudes as to what they really, really like. I would invite you to Google non-profit personas, because there's a bunch of research and reading and so on around those sorts of things, and adding whatever else you feel shapes this person and who they are. Primarily, we're trying to track the goals. What is this typical sort of persona trying to accomplish? If we're talking about the junior sports player, they're trying to accomplish a successful season and maybe level up their skills or what have you. What do they need in order to accomplish those goals? So Do they need extra training? Do they need better coaches, better equipment? Those sorts of things. And what pain points, what prevents that persona from achieving those goals? Maybe it's getting to training, maybe it's bad training times, maybe it's not having the right equipment at the club or not having enough coaches, etc., etc. So how to create the persona? Research. Don't base it on yourself, which we're all guilty of, thinking that everyone thinks like you. That's unfortunately not true, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. Collate the feedback to uncover themes and patterns. That's what we're really trying to do. I'll document each persona in a standard format. So you could flick through the 4 or 5 personas that your organization will end up with, and it's all in the same format. And validate the persona ongoing. So keep sending out surveys. This is something that organizations typically don't do well, is build it into your 666. For those that weren't here last week, 666 is my idea of a strategy, but build it into your strategy that every 12 months, you're going to send out a survey to your customers, to your members, asking them about what they want to achieve, what pains they're having, and whether or not you are promoting the organization to other people is a really, really interesting one as well to hear about. You would have seen on Tidy, we're constantly asking, would you promote us? Or how do you rate us between 1 and 10? And that's to give us an idea as to, well, how do you feel about us and what are we solving or not solving as well as we should? So examples of personas, like I've already touched on, junior participants, your mum, my mum. My mum was a persona that I've used personally for building out Tidy. If my mum can't use it to gain the way that she runs her committees, etc., well, then I'm not doing a great job. Maybe it's past members, current active members, current passive members, sponsors, etc., and a bunch of others. And again, goals, needs, and pain points is really what we're trying to pull out, which will help drive the messaging and communication that we have. So once we've got those persona, it helps us drive social media. It will adjust the stories being told and the messaging and even the channels that we're using, the headlines that we use, the copy that we use. Like I said, people are scrolling. Their thumbs are pretty good tools at moving through masses of media. What headline are you going to put in? What copy? What interesting stories are you going to write with it? Each social medium requires a different type of take on it, different type of story. A Facebook page is very different to a private Facebook group. Instagram photos are very different to a snappy Instagram story. And YouTube isn't something that we've spoken about much because it sort of gets lost. But like I said at the top with the statistics, 20 minutes a day for your average Australian, there is a place for YouTube content, but it typically has to be higher quality, which is, it feels like it's out of reach for lots of community organizations. It actually isn't, but we'll get into that another day. But YouTube should be part of the conversation, I think. And email, so segment your contacts. We've already spoken about advanced filtering and smart groups in another webinar, but segmenting your contacts to send different types of email or specific types of email to different segments is really, really important and useful for it. Again, you need to make sure that we're talking about sustainable things. It's all very well, Isaak saying, send 5 different emails to your 5 different segments, but you've got a volunteer that only has 30 minutes to do it. It's not going to happen. So you've got to be realistic with what you want to get out of it. We'll just get on to policy. So social policies period are always a fun topic and eyes glaze over, but it's actually shouldn't be that hard. It's effectively who's responsible for each medium, how many posts or types of posts, set expectations with what sort of content we're going to do with it. Try not to get a lawyer to overcomplicate a social media policy. If we're talking bullet points here rather than pages. It should fit on one page, and I think I've got an example in a moment of that. And you should not only talk about what is discouraged, because lots of these social media policies going quite negative, saying what we shouldn't be allowing on social media and how we shouldn't be talking, but it's also really important to talk about what we are wanting to talk about and those sorts of things as well. So some questions to ask yourselves as an organization as to what we're going to be sharing is, well, what is confidential? What are some things that we shouldn't be talking about? Starting off on the negative, I suppose. But there's some things that you might not want to talk about. You might not want to talk about what your budget is or isn't. You might not want to be publicizing how much sponsors are providing you, all those sorts of things. You might not want to be giving out your board members' phone numbers on social media and things of that nature. Questions around, well, are we going to lose integrity by posting this? Are we going to lose the trust of the community with it? What does a breach of confidentiality look like? You could go down the path of how we're going to punish people, etc. It's probably not worth talking about for many organizations. It's probably more talking about how we're going to look after it, because a lot of small nonprofits don't have a huge amount up their sleeves to punish people. And, do we just share public information? So information from events and so on, that if they were there, the whole world would be seen anyway with it. Clarity that an individual's opinions are their own. So if Isaac's posting something, he's not posting it on behalf of the United Nations or my university club or what have you. Respect and humility in all communication is a great one. Everyone's got a different idea of this perhaps, but I always try and say that you're talking to my mum. You don't know my mum, but I dare say that she would appreciate some respect and humility in the way that she's spoken to. So it's a nice, easy way to decipher that. And awareness that the internet never forgets. Everything that you ever say on the internet is permanent. It can be found. So don't do silly things and post silly thought bubbles that might come your way. This is the Ford Motor Company. I won't go through all of these, but the reason that I wanted to post it is the Ford Motor Company is obviously a fairly big organization. It's probably bigger than your organization, but what they were able to do, and they created this back in 2010, I think, is that they summarized this huge multinational organization into these 11 bullet points as to how they're going to talk on social media, on all the social media channels. And the good ones, I think, are use your common sense, play nice, internet's public space, the internet remembers, whatever happens in Vegas stays on Google is a lovely phrase. An official response may be needed. Respect the privacy of offline conversations. Same rules and laws apply to all communication, which is a really good one to remind the organization of. And when in doubt, ask, which is a really nice, succinct way to make sure that people, when they're posting on behalf of the organization, they do have this get out of jail, I suppose, if they're not sure, just ask, and the committee can help with it all. If Ford can do it, I have strong belief that organizations such as yours can produce a really succinct social media policy as well. This is Zappos, which is a shoe. I think they're owned by Amazon now, but effectively it's a shoe shop online. And their social media policy was be real and use your best judgment. That's it. Really, really nice and easy. Obviously, there's probably lawyers pulling their hair out that it wasn't more involved, but a really nice, easy one to decipher. One point, as Stu mentioned, everyone's a social media guru these days. Everyone's a social media promoter. Everyone knows how to use Facebook. and those sorts of things. So how do you engage more of your members or more of your broader administration team to post more information? We had a communications manager, but then we had 5 people under them all posting different things to different channels, because you know what, the 18-year-olds were actually really, really good at doing Facebook and Instagram stories, way better than I was. So I didn't want it to be stuck with me. And if I told them, well, this is our guidelines as to our social media policy, it was really easy for them to convert that over and post some really engaging stuff and take a bunch of that work off our plate. So how do you get more people involved? The ability to create social media posts is really, really easy. That's the whole game. So how do you get more people involved rather than just the 1 or 2 on the committee? Just an idea. So goals. I always start with SMART goals. So, and the same applies for social media. How can we create some really specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goals for our social media and communications channels? Ideally, they're aligning with your strategy as to, you know, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to post X amount of content. We're going to send out these 2 emails. Over the next 6 months, we want to have cross-promoted 4 of our partners or X number of sponsors to our audience. We want to have built our following on Facebook or Instagram or what have you by 100 more followers. Really, really simple. Again, you've got to be reasonable with your expectations, because we're working with small groups. They're fairly geographically constrained for a lot of the organizations that we have. So you need to be realistic with it all. A lot of groups are starting to advertise using Facebook and so on, which I think is a great idea. We spend lots of money as a community organization on lots of different things. And I think spending money on Facebook ads to try and attract more people or promote your partners or partnerships in a really strategic way can be really, really helpful. I know we've done that for our local sports clubs, which is we just wanted to be regarded as a community leader. So that was a driving strategic objective for us. So we advertised for everyone in that local government area that we were door knocking and collecting funds for cancer or what have you, and we were community leaders. And as a result, the local government started to look to us as a bit of thought leaders around the community, and that helped us with grants and so on and so forth. The dots all became connected. Long story short, I don't think you should be too afraid of dabbling or dipping your toe in advertising and promoting your organization through paid means as well. Some other things or other ideas was look at your competition or similar types of organizations for some inspiration. There's some really, really good ideas out there. Conduct some competitive analysis. Obviously, some organizations have better competitors than others. Sports clubs obviously have lots of other football clubs or netball clubs or what have you that they can look to. But the same can be said for university groups or RSL groups, all sorts of organizations that are with us. They have competitors of one sort or another that you can definitely look over the shoulder of and check out. It is all public after all, or most of it is. I would invite you to do a bit of a social media audit as well as to, well, what's the purpose of each of our social accounts? So we have Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and etc. Well, what's our social handles for each of those? Who's going to be the channel owner? So Isaac, you're going to be looking after Twitter. Stuart, you're going to be looking after Instagram. Lauren, you're going to be looking after our Facebook page, etc. Who are our audience demographics? So this goes into personas as well, but who's the typical audience that we have following us on our Facebook page? Most of the social networks have those sorts of insights for you. So you can go into the back end and have a look at the Facebook page and understand, well, this is the typical age group of people that are following us and looking at our bits and pieces. How are they using the platform? So how are they using Facebook or Instagram, etc., and how will it help us achieve our goals? So that, again, leans into the personas, but knowing that we were trying to achieve this goal of being the leader in our local community, it meant that, okay, we're going to post these types of stories that we're illustrating how we're being community leaders and how we're building great young people and how we're interacting with other organizations in our community and taking the lead with things. Scheduling. So again, I go back to our 666 strategy, but whatever your strategy is, what is happening over the next 6 months, you should have an idea, a fairly clear idea of what you've got planned for the next 6 months. Non-profit community organizations, like we've said before, have a real cadence to them. There's an AGM every year. There's typically a pre-season or start of year. There's various events that you have plugged in throughout the course of the year, and you'll have a very good idea as to what's locked in for the next 6 weeks. Every fortnight or every 4 weeks, you have a committee meeting and you look forward 6 weeks. So you understand exactly what events are happening. Maybe it's the sports games that you're participating in, or what the fixtures are. Maybe there's partners events or activities, there's community events, community partners events, and sponsors activities as well that you can help promote. There's a bunch of things that are happening in your world that you can really easily understand. And all of those things are opportunities for you to promote and raise awareness of. Scheduling considerations. You can use templates, you can use all sorts of tools, and you can make this as complex as you like, but you've got to pull yourself back sometimes and remind yourself that you're working with volunteers and they may not be as passionate as you about promoting the organization and putting their hand up for things. Like we've said before, most people go in thinking that it's a 1 hour a week type job and end up working 11 hours a week on average. So people are spending a lot more time than that. Whatever it is, if you then throw in a really complex social media communications strategy on top, people are going to lose their marbles. So you need to make sure that it's going to be maintainable and scalable as we go. The other problem that I often see is that you build a schedule for one superstar marketing genius that comes in and has a lot of energy and says, I can do this, I can do that, I can create all sorts of wonderful things. But then the next year they leave because they've been burnt out or what have you. And we're left to pick up the pieces and how do you sustain that if they leave? So making sure that it's really easy to understand the requirements and understand how we can keep it going, because the people on the outside, they don't know what the inner workings are. They just expect the same level of content or quality of content as you go. So the way that I bulletproofed it, and I've seen it work pretty well, is just, again, create some policies around, okay, these are some standards, these are some protocols that we have. So for each social event, we're going to have 3 posts pre-event and 1 social post post-event, which is 1 person. We're all putting that on Facebook. And during the event, we have specific individually focused or specific Instagram stories. So that's a separate person. That's their job, is to create an Instagram story of the quiz night or the corporate lunch or the drinks, corporate lunch, etc. Each game, we provide 3 interesting factoids between the 2 teams, which has worked really well. So that's 3 posts or historical events between the 2 organizations. Each pre-season, or even at the start of each year for non-sports groups, we ask past board members or past committee people some funny bio questions, or ask them, what's the most poignant things that you see happening over the next 12 months or things like that, which we see get really high engagement because everyone knows who Stuart is, and understanding what he thinks about the world is actually something quite interesting. So we see high engagement with those sorts of things. Interviewing 5 past players again, or 5 past board members or something along those lines for their best stories, and putting it up on video. One of the good things about YouTube and things like that is that you may only get 1 view on day 1, but by day 200 you've got 50 views or 100 views, because it's there, it's a library, as opposed to Instagram, etc., which you scroll through and you never go back again, or you rarely go back again. And finally, to bulletproof it, is sending out a survey each year, every single year. Perhaps it's, every 2 weeks before the AGM, we send out a survey that asks people, what they want to be achieving with our organisation, what problems they have with engaging with our organisation, what should our organisation be doing, have you promoted our organisation to friends and family, etc. Sending out a survey each year is a nice sort of checksum for the organisation, for yourselves as committee people, to understand how the organisation is running. So it is really easy to add tasks in Tidy. So you can just click on the calendar on the dashboard and add a quick task. So the way that we do it is you set up all your events, 666. So you set up your next 6 months worth of events. And then we go through and say, okay, well, we want 3 social events. Now we're going to assign these ones to Isaac or Lauren or what have you, saying Facebook, Instagram, etc. So you can really quickly add those sorts of tasks for the organisation. And that's it. We've delved into a fair bit with it all. So hopefully you've got a bit out of that. There's a lot of information happening. So hopefully it's been helpful.